Have you ever wondered how a simple act of kindness can completely change the course of two lives? On a rainy road on the outskirts of Chicago, an elderly man stopped to help a driver with car trouble, unaware that he was face to face with one of the greatest icons in world sports. What 75-year-old mechanic Walter Thompson didn't know was that this roadside repair would not only save Michael Jordan's appointment that night, but also trigger a chain of events that would forever transform his family's destiny. Why would a man who has everything money can buy be so deeply moved by a simple act of generosity? What did Jordan discover when he secretly visited the small workshop days later? And how would a 70-year-old family legacy on the verge of being lost forever be reborn in a way no one could have imagined? Get ready to discover a never-before-told story about the true value of selfless kindness and how sometimes our most meaningful actions are the ones that never make the headlines. The storm was mercilessly pouring down on the rural road on the outskirts of Chicago that Thursday in October. Heavy clouds, dark as coal, blocked any ray of sunlight trying to pierce the sky, turning mid-afternoon into a gray and hostile dusk. Michael Jordan gripped the steering wheel of his black Porsche 911 Turbo tightly, his eyes fixed on the slippery road as the windshield wipers struggled in vain against the curtain of falling water. The German engine roared under the hood, mirroring the growing anxiety of the former Chicago Bulls star. 20 minutes late. Damn, he muttered to himself, glancing at the Rolex on his wrist. 1,000 people waiting, and I'm stuck in this storm. What a perfect way to celebrate 15 years of the foundation. The Jordan Foundation's charity event had been planned for months. Major donors, celebrities, and most importantly, dozens of children who had benefited from the social programs he created were waiting for his speech. Michael had spent the entire week polishing every word, determined to inspire more people to contribute to the cause that had become his greatest passion since hanging up his sneakers. In the passenger seat, his leather briefcase held the carefully printed speech, words that now seemed at risk of never being spoken. If only this rain would ease up, he thought, slowing down as he approached a particularly sharp curve. 15 years building something bigger than basketball, and I might ruin it all by arriving late like a rookie. The Porsche advanced down the country road, headlights slicing through the rain like luminous blades as Michael mentally calculated alternative routes. Water pooled into treacherous puddles that caused the vehicle to hydroplane momentarily, forcing him to slow down even further. Jordan felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. It was no longer just the pressure of winning a game, but of keeping alive the hope of hundreds of children who depended on the educational and sports programs funded by his foundation. His cell phone, usually a direct line to assistants and organizers, displayed only a frustrating message. No service. Not even 6 championship rings can help me now, he said with a tense smile, glancing at the championship ring on his finger. I guess for the first time in a long while, I'm completely on my own in this one. Then it happened. Without any warning, the Porsche's engine failed. A metallic hiccup followed by a disturbing silence. The powerful purr of the German engine simply ceased, as if it had been switched off by an invisible button. The luxury vehicle, a symbol of precision engineering, now glided by pure inertia, rapidly losing speed. Michael instinctively pressed the accelerator, but the engine remained deathly silent. With a quick and precise movement, a remnant of his athletic reflexes, he steered the car onto the soaked shoulder as the steering wheel became increasingly heavy without power assistance. I can't believe this is happening, he exclaimed, slapping the steering wheel with his palm when the car finally came to a stop. Not today. Not now. The Porsche was dead, silent as a metallic sculpture beneath the relentless rain. Jordan tried to start the engine again, once, twice, 3 times, but the engine didn't even respond with a click. Just silence. Frustrated, he grabbed his cell phone, already knowing what the outcome would be. No signal bars. He moved around inside the car, holding the device in different positions, but the rural area was completely out of coverage. The rain now seemed personal, malicious in its intensity, wrapping the vehicle in an isolating curtain of water that made it nearly impossible to see more than a few meters ahead. My father once told me that every man has to face his Everest alone, he murmured, watching the rain pound the car's hood. I guess today's my day to climb a mountain. For nearly 20 minutes, Michael stayed there, hoping a driver might stop to help. Cars passed occasionally, some slowing down out of curiosity upon seeing the luxury Porsche stopped, but none stopped in the storm to offer assistance. The irony wasn't lost on Jordan. He, once one of the most recognizable men on the planet, was now anonymous inside his own car, invisible in the storm, as small as he felt when he was cut from the high school basketball team. The memory of that old rejection, which had become fuel for his legendary work ethic, now seemed distant and trivial compared to the helplessness consuming him. Maybe it's a sign, he thought darkly, watching a lightning bolt streak across the distant sky. Maybe I need to remember what it's like to be just a regular man, without all the glory and recognition. The sound of tires on wet gravel snapped Jordan out of his thoughts. Through the fogged-up window, he saw a faded blue Ford F-150 pickup truck stopping behind the Porsche. It was a model from the 70s, with peeling paint in several spots and a slightly bent front bumper, as if it had survived dozens of harsh Illinois winters. Michael felt a sudden relief mixed with caution. Deserted roads during storms weren't necessarily the safest places, even for someone with his physical stature. Still, his situation didn't offer many alternatives. "Thank God," he whispered, watching the silhouette stepping out of the truck. "I hope he has a phone." An elderly man emerged from the vehicle, moving with the deliberate slowness of someone who had lived long enough to never rush, not even in a storm. He must have been around 75, thin white hair peeking out from under a faded red Chicago Bulls cap, a detail not lost on Jordan. The man wore a dark blue jumpsuit stained with grease and oil, marks of a life spent fixing machines. Improvising a rain shield with a piece of tarp, he slowly approached the Porsche, his shoulders slightly hunched from the weight of the years. "Car trouble, son?" the old man asked as Michael lowered the window, his voice rough but kind, bearing the unmistakable accent of the American Midwest. "A storm like this doesn't spare anyone, not even fancy German cars." The man's face was a map of deep wrinkles, each line telling stories of decades spent under the sun, hunched over engines and transmissions. His eyes, however, were surprisingly vivid, blue as a summer sky, contrasting with his time-worn skin. Michael noticed the man's hands, thick, calloused, marked by age spots, but exuding the confidence that only comes from solving thousands of mechanical problems over a lifetime. To his surprise, the old man showed no signs of recognition, treating him as he would any driver in distress. "The engine just died," Jordan explained, feeling a strange humility speaking to the man who seemed so at ease in the storm. "I'm trying to get to Chicago for an important event. Do you have a phone I can use to call a tow truck?" Walter, though Michael didn't know his name yet, shook his head, raindrops streaming down his weathered face. "Out here, the signal only works near the main highway, about 5 miles from here. But let's take a look at that engine before giving up. I'm Walter, by the way. I've got a shop not far from here." Without waiting for a response, Walter motioned for Jordan to pop the hood. Michael hesitated for a moment. The Porsche was practically brand new, and the warranty might be voided by unauthorized repairs. But the clock kept ticking mercilessly, and he didn't have many options. With a sigh of resignation, he pulled the lever that released the hood. "I hope you can identify the problem," said Jordan, stepping out of the car and joining the elderly man under the rain. "My name is Michael, by the way. I appreciate the help." Walter was already leaning over the engine, his experienced eyes methodically examining each component, like a doctor conducting a full diagnosis. The rain poured relentlessly on both of them, but the old man seemed completely unfazed by it, as if decades of fixing cars in any weather had made the storm nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Michael watched with fascination as those aged hands moved confidently through the intricate parts of the Porsche, just as comfortable as they would be with an old Ford or American Chevrolet. Interesting," Walter murmured, more to himself than to Jordan. "These Germans built a beautiful toy here, but the basics are still the same since Henry Ford put cars on the road." After a few minutes of meticulous examination, Walter straightened up, a triumphant expression on his rain-soaked face. His blue eyes sparkled with the satisfaction of someone who had just solved a particularly challenging puzzle. He wiped his hands on a rag pulled from his coverall pocket, a gesture so automatic it seemed part of his own anatomy. Ignition coil, he diagnosed with absolute confidence, pointing to a specific part in the engine. It's completely shot. Back in my day, we built cars to last, not to impress. But don't worry, I can make a temporary fix so you can get to town. Michael felt a mix of relief and admiration for the quick and precise diagnosis. In his career, he had always valued specialists who fully mastered their craft. He recognized excellence when he saw it, and it was clear that Walter was a master of his trade. The old man walked back to his pickup truck, returning moments later with a small metal toolbox, so worn from use that its original color was only a distant memory. "You really think you can fix it?" Jordan asked, disbelief showing in his voice. "It's an imported car. The parts are—" Walter cut him off with a patient smile. "Son, I've been fixing cars since before you were born. The difference between a Porsche and a Ford is mostly the price and the accent. On the inside, they all speak the same mechanical language." With impressive skill, Walter improvised a repair using parts from his own truck. His hands, marked by decades of working with engines, moved with surgical precision even under the torrential rain. He removed components from the old F-150, ingeniously adapting them to temporarily replace the faulty coil in the Porsche. Michael watched, fascinated, like a surgeon operating in extreme conditions. "My father always said a good mechanic needs three things," Walter commented as he worked, the rain now easing slightly. "Ears to understand what the engine is trying to say, steady hands to do the job, and imagination to improvise when you don't have the right parts." The dexterity with which the old man handled tools and parts under the merciless rain reminded Jordan of the kind of excellence he himself had pursued on the court. That almost supernatural skill that comes from repeating the same action thousands of times until it becomes part of you. It was like watching a different form of art, less glamorous than basketball, but equally impressive in its mastery. "Almost done," Walter muttered, tightening a final connection with pliers. "You said you're heading to an important event. Something good, I hope?" Michael hesitated for a moment, unaccustomed to not being recognized, especially by someone wearing a Bulls cap. "It's a charity event for underprivileged children. A foundation I help run is celebrating 15 years of activity today." Walter nodded approvingly, not taking his eyes off the work he was doing. "It's good to see young people like you caring about others. This world needs more of that, and less of people chasing things that don't really matter in the end." That simple comment struck Jordan in an unexpected way. He, who had won every possible trophy, who possessed a fortune his family couldn't spend in generations, felt strangely moved by the disinterested praise of that old man who didn't even recognize him. There was something freeing in being seen not as the legendary number 23, but simply as a man trying to do something good for the world. The storm continued, but Michael no longer felt it as an enemy. It was just the backdrop for this unlikely encounter. "I try to do my part," he replied with a humility rarely shown in press conferences. "Sometimes I wonder if it's enough." Walter closed the Porsche's hood with a deliberately gentle motion, as if finishing a piece of art that had required his full concentration. His hands, now stained with fresh oil mixed with rainwater, looked like maps of a lifetime devoted to manual labor. The old man looked Michael straight in the eye, his blue gaze piercing and sincere. "Nothing is ever enough when it comes to doing good, son. That's why we keep trying day after day. Now let's see if this engine wakes up." Michael got into the car at Walter's request and turned the key. To his surprise, the Porsche's engine came to life with a smooth purr that quickly settled into its characteristic sound of German precision. A wide smile lit up his face as Walter watched with the quiet satisfaction of a craftsman who had just restored a masterpiece. Jordan got out of the vehicle, extending his hand to the old man in a gesture of deep gratitude. "You're a genius, Walter. You saved my day. Please let me pay you for the service," said Jordan, already reaching for his wallet in the inside pocket of his jacket, ready to offer several $100 bills. Walter raised his hand in refusal, his eyes shining with a wisdom that no amount of money could buy. The rain now fell more gently, almost like a silver curtain between the two men, a dramatic contrast to the violent storm of minutes before. The old man wiped his hands on the same worn-out rag, a ritual that seemed to mark the end of each completed job over the decades. "No need, young man. One hand washes the other in this world," he replied with dignity. "Someday you help someone else. That's the only currency that still holds real value when you get to my age." Michael insisted, but Walter was unwavering in his refusal, showing an integrity that reminded Jordan of his own father. A man of firm principles who had shaped his character long before any basketball coach had a chance. The former player felt genuine admiration for that stranger who had appeared out of nowhere, like an improvised guardian in his moment of need. "At least tell me where your shop is so I can stop by another day," Jordan asked, genuinely interested. Walter smiled and pulled from his coverall pocket a faded business card, slightly bent at the corners. "Thompson and Son," it read in simple letters, followed by an address in a small town 30 minutes from Chicago. The paper had an old-fashioned quality, yellowed by time, as if it were from another era. A relic from when business was sealed with handshakes and a man's word was worth more than signed contracts. "We've been there since 1952, Walter explained with visible pride, handing the card to Michael. "My father started the shop after returning from the Korean War. I grew up among those tools and over time taught my own son too." Jordan carefully kept the card, realizing he was holding not just contact information, but a piece of American history, a family legacy passed down from generation to generation, like the basketball skills his own father had taught him during countless afternoons on the backyard court. "I'll definitely stop by," he promised, and for the first time in a long time, it was a promise he intended to keep, not just polite parting words. Walter nodded, as if he expected nothing less, and walked back to his truck. There was no exaggerated formality or nervousness that Michael was used to encountering in people who recognized him. Just the simple respect between two men who had shared a moment of genuine human connection under a storm on a forgotten road in Illinois. "Drive carefully, son," Walter said before getting into his vehicle, "and good luck with your charity event. I hope those kids know how lucky they are to have people like you caring for them." Michael watched the old truck pull away, its taillights becoming red dots through the curtain of rain that was now falling gently. For a moment he stood there, feeling something rare in his celebrity life, constantly surrounded by schedules, appointments, and people wanting something from him. It was a feeling of genuine connection, without pretension or ulterior motives, the kind of human bond that becomes increasingly rare as fame grows. "One hand washes the other," he repeated to himself as he got into the Porsche. He has no idea how much I needed to hear that today. With the engine purring smoothly thanks to Walter's skilled hands, Jordan resumed his journey to Chicago. The clock indicated that he would arrive only 15 minutes late, a miracle considering the situation he had found himself in. But more important than punctuality was the subtle change he felt within himself. The carefully prepared speech that was in the folder on the passenger seat suddenly felt artificial, too rehearsed. "I think today I'll speak from the heart," he decided, watching the skyscrapers of Chicago appear on the horizon. "About how sometimes we need to get lost to really find what matters." When he finally arrived at the event hall, the organizers greeted him with expressions of obvious relief. There were over 1,000 people waiting, including celebrities, business people, and, more importantly, dozens of children who had benefited from the foundation's programs over the years. Michael handed his coat to an assistant and walked directly to the stage, ignoring the questions about his delay. Under the bright lights with hundreds of eyes fixed on him, Michael Jordan, the man who had faced the pressure of final seconds in championship games, felt a different emotion. It wasn't the competitive adrenaline he knew so well, but something deeper, more meaningful. Instead of picking up the prepared speech, he approached the microphone and smiled. "I apologize for the delay," he began, his voice resonating through the silent hall. "But today, on my way here, I received one of the most important lessons of my life, and I think that's exactly what our foundation is about. Unexpected moments that change our perspective forever." And so, before an audience that expected to hear about statistics, donations, and future plans, Michael Jordan spoke about an elderly man named Walter, who had fixed more than just a broken car on a rural road during a storm. He spoke about selfless generosity, about the dignity of honest work, and about how sometimes we need to get lost to find our true direction. It was a speech that wasn't on any paper, but came directly from an experience that, in its simplicity, had touched something deep in his heart. Later, many would say it was the most inspiring speech Michael Jordan had ever given. That night, donations to the foundation broke all previous records. But while receiving the enthusiastic applause, Jordan thought about the promise he had made to himself in the car, looking at the faded card in his pocket. Soon he would visit the Thompson and Son workshop, and something told him that this wouldn't be the end of his story with the old mechanic who had asked for nothing in return for his kindness. 4 days had passed since the encounter on the road. The autumn sky over Chicago had cleared, replacing the stormy clouds with a crystal-clear blue that contrasted with the golden leaves of the oaks lining the avenues. Michael Jordan drove his black Range Rover down the interstate, moving away from the city's skyscrapers and heading toward the countryside. The GPS remained off. He had memorized the address from the worn card that now rested in the center console, preferring to find his way on his own, as if the journey were part of a more personal discovery. The charity event had been a resounding success, but something in the simplicity of that encounter in the rain continued to resonate in his mind with a clarity he rarely experienced outside the basketball courts. "It's strange," Michael murmured to himself, adjusting his sunglasses as he watched the rural landscape begin to replace the suburbs. "I spent 2 decades being recognized in every corner of the planet, and now I can't stop thinking about the one person who had no idea who I was. Maybe that's what I need, to just be an ordinary man for a few hours." The sign marking the entrance to Oakwood appeared at the side of the road, a town too small to appear on tourist maps, yet too large to be called a village. Jordan slowed down, observing every detail of Main Street unfolding before him like a sepia-toned photograph faded by time. It was one of those places where progress seemed to have touched gently, preserving the essence of an America that existed mostly in collective memory and nostalgic films. A diner with a neon sign proclaimed best apple pie in the county, next to an Art Deco cinema that showed only one movie per week. People walked leisurely down the cracked sidewalks, stopping to chat on street corners as if time were an abundant resource, not the scarce commodity that dominated life in big cities. I could have grown up in a place like this, Jordan thought, feeling an unexpected pang of nostalgia for a life he had never lived. Maybe in another version of the story, I would have just been Michael from the local basketball team, and there'd be nothing wrong with that. Following the directions on the card, Jordan turned right onto a side street where the buildings became more sparse and functional. His heart raced slightly when he spotted 2 blocks away the simple but well-preserved sign, Thompson and Son, auto mechanics since 1952. Instinctively, he slowed down even more, as if approaching a sacred place that demanded reverence. The shop occupied a modest lot on the corner, with a small parking lot in front where a few cars were waiting for maintenance, mostly older American models, witnesses to a loyal, local clientele. The main building, painted in a faded blue hue from the sun and seasons, looked solid and welcoming, with large garage doors open, revealing the interior where the metallic sounds of tools at work echoed. 70 years of family history condensed into a single place, murmured Jordan, parking across the street to discreetly observe. How many lives have been touched within these walls without anyone writing headlines about it? It was then that he noticed something he hadn't expected, a rectangular sign, visibly new in contrast to the aging facade. For sale, followed by a phone number. The sight caused Jordan an immediate sense of discomfort, as if witnessing the imminent end of something precious he had barely had time to know. With deliberate movements, he grabbed a Chicago White Sox cap from the back seat, an ironic choice considering his historic relationship with the team, and a pair of sunglasses. It wasn't an elaborate disguise, but in small Oakwood, where the locals likely knew every face that frequented Main Street, it would be enough to ensure a few minutes of anonymity for an occasional visitor. "The old cap and sunglasses trick," he said to himself with a smile, checking his appearance in the rearview mirror. "It worked in every airport in the world for years. It should work in a small town." Jordan crossed the street and approached the Thompson workshop with calculated casual steps, as if he were just another potential customer interested in the services offered. The interior of Thompson's workshop turned out to be exactly as he had imagined, yet at the same time, much more impressive. Tools of all shapes and eras adorned the walls in a meticulous organization bordering on art. From the oldest and purely mechanical ones, arranged almost like museum relics, to the most recent electronic pieces, each in its designated place, reflecting the evolution of the automotive industry through the decades. Frame photos in simple wooden frames told the visual story of the Thompson family. Men from three different generations, always wearing similar overalls, always next to cars from corresponding eras, always with the same dignified pride in their eyes. I've never seen such an organized workshop, thought Jordan, genuinely impressed by the evident care in every detail. It's like you could tell the story of America through these objects and images. The characteristic smell of engine oil mixed with rubber and heated metal permeated the air, not as an unpleasant odor, but as the aromatic signature of a place where manual labor was done with dedication and respect. Soft metallic sounds echoed through the space, the clinking of screwdrivers against metal surfaces, the muffled noise of a wrench adjusting bolts, the low hum of an old radio tuned to a country music station playing Johnny Cash. It was an industrial symphony that spoke of continuity and tradition. This place isn't just a workshop, he murmured to himself, lightly touching an old decorative gas pump near the entrance. It's a living piece of American history. As he discreetly explored the environment, Jordan noticed Walter near the entrance of the workshop, talking to a man who clearly didn't belong in that setting. The visitor wore a gray suit that seemed too expensive for the occasion, with a gold watch that reflected the autumn sunlight every time he gestured. His posture exuded the artificial confidence of someone used to making business deals, not fixing broken things. Jordan slowly approached, pretending to be interested in some old tools for sale displayed on a nearby table, positioning himself strategically at a distance that allowed him to hear the conversation without seeming intrusive. "Mr. Thompson, with all due respect, my offer is generous considering the circumstances," the suited man was saying, his voice carrying that condescending tone of someone who believes they are doing a favor. "Commercial properties in this area aren't exactly in high demand, and the equipment, well, let's just say it's more of a museum than a modern workshop." Walter stood erect, with the silent dignity Jordan had recognized during their first meeting. Only his eyes betrayed the inner emotional storm, a mixture of wounded pride and painful resignation that seemed out of place on a face normally marked by quiet confidence. "The price is lower than it's worth, Mr. Anderson," Walter replied, his voice controlled but undeniably tense. "These tools may not be the most modern, but each one of them has helped sustain families in this community for decades. This is not just a business I'm selling, it's my father's and my grandfather's legacy." The buyer, Anderson, adjusted his tie in a gesture that seemed to communicate barely concealed impatience. His shiny Italian shoes absurdly contrasted with the oil-stained concrete floor of the workshop, as if representing two worlds destined to remain separate. "I understand the sentimental value, Mr. Thompson. Truly I do," he replied, although his tone suggested exactly the opposite. "But business is business. The land has potential for a more contemporary venture. Maybe a mini-mall or apartments. The future comes for us all, eventually." Walter took a deep breath, running his hand through his thinning white hair in a gesture that spoke of emotional exhaustion. Suddenly, he looked much older and more vulnerable than during that storm on the road, as if the weight of an entire life had descended upon his shoulders at that exact moment. "I have no choice," he finally replied, his tired voice cutting Jordan like a knife. "My granddaughter Lucy has a rare heart condition. The specialized treatment in Boston is our only hope, but the insurance doesn't cover it since it's experimental. The doctors say she needs a surgery within the next 2 months, or the complications could become permanent." Walter paused, visibly struggling to maintain his composure. His hands, those skilled hands that had repaired hundreds of cars over the decades, were now slightly trembling. "This workshop is all I have to sell, and even then, it may not be enough. I need $150,000 for the treatment, plus the costs of lodging in Boston during the recovery. Your offer is still $20,000 short of that." Anderson took on an expression that was meant to show sympathy, but only succeeded in conveying cold calculation. His gaze swept across the workshop, not as someone appreciating the value of what he saw, but as someone assessing how much profit he could make by destroying it. "I'll think about it, Mr. Thompson. Maybe I can convince my investors to come closer to what you need," he offered magnanimously, as if doing an extraordinary favor. "I'll return with a final answer next week." Jordan felt a wave of indignation grow in his chest as he witnessed the scene. The disparity of power in the negotiation was painfully obvious. On one side, a man selling his family legacy to save a child. On the other, a real estate speculator who saw only dollars, where others saw memories and history. "Gentlemen like this Anderson will never understand the real value of things," he thought bitterly. To them, everything in the world has a price, but nothing has value. The buyer promised to think about it and left, his metallic steps echoing on the concrete as if announcing the inexorable advance of the progress he represented. Walter remained still for a few moments, looking at the empty space where the man had been. With a slow, almost ritualistic motion, he turned to the workshop sign his father had hand-painted decades ago. His rough, calloused fingers touched the faded letters with the gentleness normally reserved for sacred relics or loved ones weakened by age. "Sorry, Dad," he whispered, so softly that Jordan could barely hear. "I tried to keep alive what you built, but now Lucy's life depends on this. You would have done the same." That moment of pure vulnerability, with no witnesses, or so Walter believed, revealed more about the elderly man's character than any prolonged conversation could have. Jordan felt simultaneously like an intruder in the private pain of a stranger, and deeply connected with the raw humanity of that moral dilemma. It wasn't any different from the pressure he himself had felt so many times on the courts, but with infinitely more significant consequences than any championship. How can the most expensive healthcare system in the world make a grandfather choose between his legacy and his granddaughter's life? Jordan reflected, discreetly stepping back. This is not how it should work. Not wanting to intrude further into Walter's private moment, Jordan quietly walked away, heading toward the exit. As he moved, he observed the elderly man walking deeper into the workshop and turning on the main lights, preparing for another day of work. There was an impressive dignity in the way Walter put on his work apron, as if donning armor to face not only the present day, but the entire uncertainty of the future. He hasn't given up yet, even knowing this may be one of the last days in this place, Jordan thought, feeling an admiration that transcended any difference between their lives. There's a lesson here about integrity that all the trophies in the world can't teach. Back in the Range Rover, Michael remained silent for several minutes, watching the workshop through the windshield. An idea was forming in his mind, not as a calculated business plan or a publicity opportunity, but as something much more personal. Something that reflected not the Michael Jordan of Nike commercials or NBA championships, but the son of James and Dolores Jordan, who had been raised to recognize and honor the value of honest work and personal integrity. "Maybe I found Walter on that road for a reason," he murmured, taking his phone out of his pocket. "And maybe that reason has nothing to do with broken cars." With renewed determination, Jordan started the engine and pulled away slowly, casting one last look at the Thompson and Son workshop through the rearview mirror. The gears in his mind were already turning at full speed, formulating not a move on the court, but a plan to intervene without compromising Walter's dignity. It was a challenge unlike any other he had faced. There were no fans, referees, or scoreboards, just raw human need and the opportunity to make a difference in a way that no sports statistic could ever capture. Some debts can't be paid with money, he thought, accelerating toward Chicago. Some require something far more valuable, the chance to return hope to those who showed us kindness when we asked for nothing. Monday morning found Michael Jordan in his office in downtown Chicago. The minimalist and sleek space, with photographs of significant moments from his career, reflected his personality. Through the window, the urban skyline stretched under the autumn sun, lighting up Lake Michigan. But his eyes were fixed on the faded business card of the Thompson and Son workshop between his fingers. 70 years of family history can't end like this, he murmured. Not when I have the resources to prevent it. The intercom beeped, followed by the voice of his assistant informing him that the summoned team had arrived. Jordan tucked the business card into his jacket pocket, adjusted his tie, and authorized their entry. Seconds later, David Mitchell, his corporate attorney, Sarah Daniels, head of public relations, and Marcus Reynolds, the financial director, entered. They all carried tablets and expressions of curiosity. Emergency summons like this were rare. "Thank you for coming so quickly," Jordan began, gesturing to the chairs arranged in front of his desk. "What we'll discuss today will not appear in any official report or press release. In fact, I want it to be recorded only as workshop project in all internal documents, with no mention of my name or personal involvement." The three exchanged a brief glance, intrigued by the unusual introduction. David, the lawyer, leaned slightly forward, his thin-framed glasses reflecting the natural light flooding the room. "Michael, you know we can be discreet, but I need to understand exactly what we're planning to ensure everything is done within legal parameters," he commented with the caution typical of someone who had spent decades navigating the complex legal intricacies of high-profile business deals. "Are we talking about a real estate acquisition? A new commercial venture?" Jordan stood up, unable to contain the energy that pulsed through his body. He walked over to the window, briefly observing the city sprawling below, before turning to face his team. There was an intensity in his eyes that they knew well, the same one that preceded game-changing decisions, the look of a competitor who would settle for nothing less than excellence. "I want to buy an auto repair shop," he announced simply, watching the expressions of surprise form instantly on the faces before him. "A small family-owned shop in a town called Oakwood, about 40 minutes from here, and I want to buy it anonymously, paying well above market value, with the express condition that the seller never knows who's behind the transaction." The silence that followed was momentarily broken only by the soft hum of the air conditioning system. Sarah was the first to recover from the initial shock, her mind trained to manage public images, already calculating possible angles. "Is this a strategy for diversifying investments in small businesses? Or something related to classic car?" she asked, trying to fit the unusual request into some familiar narrative. "We could develop a story about preserving traditional American businesses, valuing craftsmanship." Jordan interrupted her with a gentle but firm gesture. "This isn't a public relations move, Sarah. In fact, it's the exact opposite. I don't want any publicity, no articles, no mention of my involvement. It's personal." In the following minutes, Jordan recounted the encounter on the road, Walter's selfless generosity, and the recent discovery about the shop's situation and the sick granddaughter. As he spoke, he noticed the change in his team's expressions, from initial confusion to understanding, and finally to a quiet respect for the mission he was outlining. When he finished, Marcus was already doing calculations on his tablet, the financial director's analytical mind automatically charting efficient routes to implement the plan. "We can create a special-purpose real estate investment company, completely separate from your other holdings," he suggested, without lifting his eyes from the numbers. "Multiple layers of separation, anonymous shareholders, all perfectly legal and impenetrable to any casual investigation. The seller will only see the company name, not yours." David nodded, complimenting the strategy with legal aspects. "With the right structure, we can ensure that even the employees involved in the transaction won't know the real purpose or who's behind it. We'll have to use strict confidentiality agreements with any service providers." Jordan returned to his chair, spinning the championship ring on his finger, an unconscious habit that emerged in moments of important decisions. The familiar weight of the gold against his skin was a constant reminder that significant victories rarely came without strategy and total commitment. "I want complete anonymity," Jordan instructed his lawyer, spinning a basketball between his fingers, another nervous habit he kept from his playing days. "The seller cannot know who is buying. It's crucial that he never connects this transaction to me. This is not about ego or recognition. It's about allowing a man to maintain his dignity while receiving the help he needs." David took quick notes on his tablet, nodding affirmatively. "I can structure this in such a way that the offer appears to come from a group of investors interested in preserving historic businesses in small towns. It's an angle that would justify the above-market price without raising suspicion." Jordan watched his team working, turning his vision into concrete actions with the efficiency he demanded in all aspects of his business. It was a reminder of how much power and influence he had accumulated, resources that could now be directed toward a cause that none of them fully understood, but respected for the importance it clearly held for him. For a moment, he felt the weight of that responsibility, the obligation to use his resources meaningfully, a consciousness that had grown in him since he hung up his sneakers. "We're not stopping there," he continued, picking up his phone. "The sale of the shop is just the first part of the plan. The girl, Lucy, needs the best available medical treatment, and we're going to make sure she gets it too." With decisive movements, Jordan dialed a number that few had direct access to. After 2 rings, a professional voice answered on the other end. Dr. James Harrison was considered one of the pioneers in pediatric heart surgery, with a waiting list that stretched for months. His work with minimally invasive techniques for correcting congenital heart defects had revolutionized the field, saving hundreds of children who, a decade earlier, would have had grim prognoses. He was also, coincidentally, a passionate basketball fan who had followed Jordan's career since the early days with the Bulls. "Dr. Harrison? Michael Jordan speaking," he said, putting the phone on speaker so his team could follow and coordinate actions. "Thank you for answering so promptly." The surprise in the doctor's voice was palpable even through the phone connection. "Mr. Jordan, it's an unexpected honor. How can I assist you?" Jordan adjusted himself in his chair, adopting the direct posture he used when the matter was too serious for small talk or prolonged pleasantries. The same focused intensity that paralyzed opponents on the courts was now directed toward a battle of a completely different nature, but equally important. "I need a favor, doctor," Jordan said, holding the phone firmly. "There's a girl named Lucy Thompson who needs the best available treatment. She has a rare heart condition that requires specialized surgery. Her grandfather is selling the family business to try to pay for the procedure. But I want to intervene discreetly. I want her to receive everything she needs without the family knowing where the resources are coming from." There was a brief moment of silence on the other end of the line, followed by a cautious response. "I understand your intention, Mr. Jordan, and it's admirable. However, there are admission protocols, waiting lists, ethical considerations." Jordan gently interrupted, his voice conveying the urgency of the situation without sounding forceful. "Dr. Harrison, I'm not asking you to ignore medical protocols or compromise your professional standards. I'm offering to cover all the treatment costs, the procedure, the hospitalization, rehabilitation, the family's accommodation. I want to donate these resources through an anonymous foundation so that the medical team can focus solely on what's best for Lucy without financial concerns." The proposal hung in the air for a few seconds as everyone in the room awaited the doctor's response. Jordan knew he was asking for something complex, not only the prioritized treatment, but a discreet coordination that would protect the dignity of the Thompson family. He was fully aware that his name and influence opened doors, but also that there were ethical limits that professionals like Dr. Harrison would not cross, even for a sports legend. "There is a possibility," the doctor finally responded, his voice warmer. "We have a research program funded by private donations for rare cases like this. Selected cases receive advanced experimental treatment, with all costs covered." Jordan exchanged meaningful glances with his team, all immediately grasping the elegance of the proposed solution. Sarah was already taking quick notes, probably structuring the necessary documentation for a substantial donation to the mentioned research program. "That sounds ideal, Doctor," Jordan agreed. "We can make a significant donation to the program, strengthening the research overall, while ensuring Lucy is one of the beneficiaries." The doctor, who had a framed photo of Jordan in his office since the first Bulls championship title, agreed immediately. "I'll need the full medical history, recent exams, and specific case details. With that information, I can formally assess and include her in the program. Anyway, based on what you've described, it seems exactly the type of case we study." As they finalized the details of the conversation, Jordan sensed an additional layer of satisfaction in his plan. He wasn't just helping one specific family. The donation to the research program meant that other children with similar conditions would also benefit. It was the kind of multiplying effect he sought in all his philanthropic initiatives, often carried out with much more publicity through his official foundation. "My team will send all the necessary documentation today, along with the donation," Jordan concluded. "And Doctor, I trust in your absolute discretion on this matter." After hanging up, the silence in the room lasted only a few seconds before the team sprang into coordinated action. Marcus was already calculating the necessary amounts for the hospital donation, while David was structuring the legal aspects of the anonymous transfer. Sarah, in turn, was contacting her network to locate Lucy's medical details without alerting the Thompson family. "Do we have a budget limit for this project?" Marcus asked, ever the financial pragmatist. Jordan shook his head with a slight smile. "Not in this case, Marcus. Do whatever is necessary for the treatment, for the purchase of the workshop, for everything. Some investments transcend spreadsheets and financial returns." But Jordan's plan didn't end with the medical solution and the workshop purchase. There was a third dimension he hadn't fully revealed to his team yet. Rising again, he walked to the large whiteboard that occupied one of the walls of his office, a tool he preferred to visualize complex strategies, even in the digital age. With a blue marker, he began sketching what seemed to be a building's blueprint. "The purchase of the workshop is just the beginning," he explained, drawing decisive lines on the board. "What I have in mind is a complete transformation, but one that preserves the essence and history of the place." In the following days, as the legal structure for the workshop purchase and the medical plan for Lucy moved forward silently, Jordan devoted himself to the third phase of his project with an intensity his team recognized from the days he prepared for championship finals. A new team was called, this time architects specializing in restoration and design of automotive workshops. The meeting took place in Jordan's apartment, with a panoramic view of Lake Michigan on a cloudy Sunday that made the water almost as gray as the autumn sky. 5 professionals gathered around the dining table turned into an improvised workstation. Jordan had spread out on the polished surface the photographs he had discreetly taken of the Thompson workshop during his visit. Images of tools meticulously organized, the counter worn by time, the photographs of 3 generations of mechanics proudly displayed on the simple walls. Every detail captured by his attentive eye now served as a reference for what he was about to propose. "I want to completely renovate, but preserve the history and the soul of the place," he explained to the architects, pointing to details that others would have ignored. The marks on the walls where tools had been hung for decades, the scratches on the counter that told stories of parts repaired and lives transformed. Every mark, every imperfection, every element in this place tells a story of honest work through generations. I don't want to erase that. I want to honor it while we create something new. The architects watched with growing interest, grasping the unusual vision presented to them. The lead designer of the group, Elena, a woman in her 50s with decades of experience in restoring historic buildings, studied the photographs with particular attention. "You don't just want a modern workshop with a vintage look," she observed, understanding the nuance of the request. "You want a natural evolution of what already exists, as if time itself had allowed the place to grow organically, rather than being completely replaced." Jordan nodded vigorously, satisfied to be understood. "Exactly. I want Walter, the owner, to feel like he's walking into the same place he's known all his life. Just better, updated, ready for the future, but anchored in the past." As the team discussed concepts and possibilities, Jordan walked around the room, his contained energy barely fitting within the spacious apartment. He paused by the window for a moment, gazing at the vastness of the lake, letting the professionals debate technical aspects among themselves. Over the years, he had learned to select extraordinary experts and then give them space to exercise their expertise, a leadership skill that had transcended from the courts to business. "I was thinking of something more ambitious than just a renovation," he intervened after a few minutes, returning to the table. "What if we turn part of the space into a school, a place where young people can learn a craft that is disappearing, real repair work, not just part replacement?" The suggestion caused a momentary pause in the discussions, followed by growing enthusiasm among the professionals. One of the architects, specialized in educational spaces, was already beginning to sketch possible layouts that integrated teaching areas into the traditional workshop environment. The idea found fertile ground. The concept of preserving not only a building, but a set of knowledge and skills that were at risk of being lost in the age of planned obsolescence. "We could design workstations for apprentices," suggested one of the designers, Keep the workshop functional, as it always has been, but add areas where Walter can demonstrate techniques, explain processes. Jordan absorbed each suggestion, occasionally steering the conversation back to the fundamental principles he envisioned. It was the same iterative process he had used to perfect his game over the years. Ideas being refined, mentally tested, adjusted until the final version emerged as a perfect synthesis of the original goal, with valuable contributions from experts. "We're not just renovating a workshop," he said with the same intensity he demonstrated on the courts, leaning over the table to emphasize his point. "We're preserving a legacy. We're saying that some things shouldn't be discarded or replaced. They should be valued, restored, passed on." The energy in the room was palpable as the professionals grasped not only the technical details of the project, but its emotional dimension. It wasn't often that a client invested so much personal meaning in a commercial project. And the story behind the renovation, which Jordan had shared partially, omitting only Lucy's condition, inspired a level of commitment that transcended the typical professional relationship. When the meeting ended, hours later, the initial concepts were already taking shape in preliminary sketches. Thompson and Son's workshop wouldn't just be restored, it would be transformed into a unique hybrid of functional workspace and educational center, where the knowledge accumulated by generations could be passed on to young apprentices. The project would carefully preserve historical elements. The original sign would be restored. Vintage tools would be displayed in special showcases, and old photographs would be remolded and highlighted as part of the space's visual narrative. "I want an aggressive timeline for implementation," Jordan instructed as the professionals gathered their materials. "As soon as the purchase is finalized, we need to be ready to start immediately. We're against the clock." After the design team left, Jordan remained alone in his apartment, contemplating the Chicago skyline as it transformed with the sunset. The city lights began to dot the urban landscape as the day gave way to night, creating that magical transition that always made him reflect on transformations and possibilities. In his mind, he visualized each component of the plan fitting together like pieces of a complex puzzle. The anonymous purchase of the workshop, Lucy's treatment through the research program, the renovation that would transform a family business on the brink of closure into a revitalized legacy for the future. "It's strange," he thought, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. "I spent my entire career chasing victories that the whole world would watch. Now the one that matters most is the one no one will ever know was mine." The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was David, his lawyer, with updates on the offer for the workshop. "Michael, the shell company is formally established, and the offer was sent this afternoon," he reported. $200,000 for the property, with strict confidentiality clauses in the contract. Well above the $150,000 Mr. Thompson mentioned needing for his granddaughter's treatment. Jordan felt a wave of satisfaction upon hearing the numbers. The amount was significantly higher than necessary, ensuring that Walter would not only cover medical expenses, but also have a reserve for the future. Still, for someone with his fortune, it was a modest sum, the equivalent of a few minutes of a sneaker commercial or a day's interest from his investments. "And what about the medical program?" he asked, walking into the kitchen to pour himself a glass of water. "Sarah got Lucy's medical records through contacts at the local hospital," David replied. "They've already been sent to Dr. Harrison, who confirmed that the case qualifies perfectly for the research program. In fact, he seemed quite enthusiastic about the therapeutic possibilities." The news brought a rare sense of satisfaction to Jordan since he left the courts. The certainty of something truly meaningful in motion, something that transcended trophies and records. A play executed behind the scenes of real life, where the true differences are made without applause. "Thank you, David. Keep me updated," he concluded, returning to the window. The city sparkled below, millions of lights representing millions of stories. Somewhere, Walter Thompson was probably working in his workshop, extracting the most from his property, worrying about his granddaughter, unaware of the storm of activity triggered by a brief encounter. "Some debts can only be paid with actions," Jordan murmured, contemplating his reflection. The coming weeks would be crucial. The offer needed to be accepted, Lucy admitted into the program. Designs finalized, teams mobilized. There were countless variables, many beyond his control. Like a game-deciding match, but the victory would be measured by the sparkle in a recovered girl's eyes and the relief of an elderly man realizing that his legacy would continue. And this victory needed to remain anonymous, detached from the image that had defined his public life. Maybe this is what it truly means to give back, he reflected, watching the stars that now dotted the night sky above Chicago. Not to build an image or a public legacy, but simply because it's the right thing to do. The letter arrived on a sunny autumn Tuesday. Walter was on the porch of the modest house he had inhabited for 4 decades, sweeping the fallen leaves that the stubborn wind kept piling against the door, when the mailman approached with an envelope that looked important. The discreet logo in the top corner simply said Horizon Investments LLC, a name that meant nothing to him. Inside, on high-quality letterhead, was an offer that initially seemed like a typo: $200,000 for the Thompson & Son workshop, with detailed clauses ensuring a swift completion of the transaction and a confidentiality agreement for both parties. Walter read the document 3 times, his wrinkled hands trembling progressively with each reading, his breath growing shorter as the reality of the figure sank in. The amount was significantly higher than the $150,000 he had calculated needing for Lucy's treatment, a sum that the previous buyer, Anderson, had considered excessive and which Walter had reluctantly accepted to reduce in subsequent negotiations. There must be some mistake, he murmured to himself, leaning against the porch pillar for support. No one would pay that much for an old workshop in a forgotten town. Unless they know something about the land I don't. The following days were a whirlwind of conflicting emotions for Walter. He consulted Frank Henderson, the only lawyer in the small town of Oakwood, who confirmed the legitimacy of the company and the documents, but admitted that he had never heard of Horizon Investments. A quick search revealed only that it was a subsidiary of a larger conglomerate specializing in the preservation of historic businesses in small American communities. A concept that sounded noble, but that aroused Walter's natural suspicion, forged over decades of watching the gradual disappearance of family businesses like his, swallowed up by impersonal corporations. The urgency of Lucy's treatment, however, spoke louder than any hesitation. Every day of waiting was one less day for his granddaughter, whose irregular heartbeats had worsened in recent weeks, scaring everyone during a particularly severe episode that led to a brief hospitalization. "Frank, are you sure there's nothing suspicious about this offer?" Walter asked the lawyer, studying the contract again while they had coffee at the local diner. "It seems too good to be true. The amount, the speed, everything." After a week of tortured deliberation, Walter finally accepted the offer. The contract was signed in the small makeshift office in the back of the workshop, a space he rarely used beyond filling out occasional forms and receipts. The Horizon Investments representative was a middle-aged man named Douglas, wearing a flawless gray suit that seemed absurdly formal by Oakwood standards. His professional demeanor and corporate vocabulary stood in stark contrast to the direct simplicity Walter was used to in his daily interactions. As he signed each page of the contract with his worn ballpoint pen, politely refusing the gleaming Mont Blanc offered by the visitor, Walter felt the weight of generations on his shoulders. The photos of his father and grandfather seemed to watch him from the walls of the office, silent witnesses to the end of a family era. "With this, it's officially concluded, Mr. Thompson," said Douglas, organizing the documents in his Italian leather briefcase. "The funds will be transferred to your account within the next 24 hours, as agreed. Horizon Investments has great respect for the legacy you and your family have built here, and we intend to honor that history in our future plans for the space." With tears held back in his eyes, Walter handed over the key ring to the workshop to the representative of the mysterious company. Each key represented a different part of the family business: the main entrance, the parts storage, the customer files, the small safe where he kept important documents. The cold metal against his palm for the last time seemed to draw heat not just from his hand, but from his entire being. When the representative left with vague promises of respectful revitalization of the space, Walter was left alone in what was now officially the property of strangers. He slowly walked across the oil-stained concrete floor, touching tools and equipment as if saying goodbye to old friends. Each piece, each machine, every mark on the wall carried memories. His father teaching him to disassemble his first engine at 10, him showing the same process to his son 2 decades later. The satisfied smiles of customers whose vehicles had been written off by other shops and resurrected by the skilled hands of the Thompsons. 70 years of my family's history end today, Walter murmured to himself as he closed the workshop door for the last time, the setting sun casting long shadows through the dusty windows. Dad, forgive me. I couldn't pass on what you built. But I'm saving Lucy, and I know you would have done the same. The sound of the key turning in the lock echoed like a chapter closing, reverberating not only in the physical space, but in the very timeline of the Thompson family. Walter stood motionless for several minutes, his hand still on the doorknob, unable to complete the final act of detachment. When he finally turned to leave, he noticed that the sky had taken on that peculiar shade of purple and orange his father always said was the magic hour for fixing cars. That time of day when the natural light was perfect for spotting small issues that electric lights often missed. It was as if the universe itself was offering one last tribute to the tradition now ending. The move to Boston happened with surprising speed. 2 days after selling the workshop, Walter received a call from Boston University Hospital, informing him that Lucy had been selected for an experimental pediatric heart treatment program. The timing seemed almost miraculous, as if the universe were orchestrating compensation for the sacrifice of the workshop. Walter, his daughter Megan, and little Lucy boarded a flight the following morning, with expenses covered by the medical program. It was the first time Walter had flown in over 2 decades, and he gazed out the window at the clouds with the same technical fascination he had dedicated to complex engines throughout his life. Lucy, despite her delicate condition, exhibited the typical resilience of children, excited about the big adventure, as she called the trip, unaware of the gravity of the situation or the sacrifice her grandfather had made for them to be there. "Grandpa, when we get home, are you going to teach me how to fix cars like you promised?" Lucy asked during the flight, her big blue eyes, so much like her grandfather's, shining with innocent expectation. "I want to be the first woman in the Thompson family to work in the workshop." The reception at Massachusetts General Hospital was yet another inexplicable event in a growing series of positive surprises. Expecting the impersonal treatment typical of large medical institutions, Walter, Megan, and Lucy were greeted by a dedicated team immediately upon their arrival. The most impressive part was the presence of Dr. Harrison himself, a prominent figure in pediatric cardiology, whose name Walter had only known through desperate research about Lucy's condition. The middle-aged doctor, with thin-frame glasses and a tie subtly patterned with small hearts, his good luck charm in one, as he explained, personally greeted the family in the lobby, something practically unheard of for a professional of his caliber. "Lucy Thompson?" he asked with a genuine smile, kneeling to be at eye level with the girl. "I heard you have the bravest heart in the Midwest. We're so happy you were selected for our special program." A middle-aged nurse named Patricia led Walter and Megan to the administrative office to finalize paperwork, while Lucy went with Dr. Harrison for a preliminary evaluation. Walter mentally prepared himself for the inevitable discussion about costs and coverage, gathering the documents that proved the recent sale of the workshop. To his surprise, the conversation took a completely different turn. "Your case has been selected for a special program," the nurse informed him with a warm smile as she typed information into a computer. "All costs are covered by a cardiac research foundation. Not only surgery and treatments, but also accommodation for the family during the recovery period, post-operative follow-up, and any necessary medication in the foreseeable future." Walter looked at his daughter in disbelief, his mind struggling to process the information. The $200,000 from the sale of the workshop sat untouched in his bank account, money he had mentally allocated for medical expenses, never imagining that any significant amount would remain. Now confronted with this unexpected blessing, he felt a complex emotion that mixed relief, gratitude, and a twinge of suspicion. The temporal connection between the sale of the workshop and the selection for the program seemed too unlikely to be mere coincidence. "There must be some mistake," Walter finally managed to say, his voice thick. "We came prepared to cover the costs. We never signed up for any special program." Patricia patiently explained that the program selected cases based on specific medical criteria, the patient's age, and the potential for a positive response to the experimental treatment. Lucy simply met all the necessary requirements. Walter, sitting in the hospital waiting room with a cheap cup of coffee in his trembling hands, accepted the unexpected blessing without questioning further, focusing all his prayers on his granddaughter's recovery. Still, deep in his mind, the feeling lingered that something extraordinary was happening, something that transcended coincidence or luck. "Megan, don't you think it's strange?" he whispered to his daughter while they waited for news from Lucy's initial evaluation. First, an inexplicably generous offer for the workshop, now this program covering all the costs. Back in Oakwood, transformations of a completely different nature were underway. The Thompson and Son workshop, which for decades had maintained the same modest and functional appearance, had suddenly become the epicenter of intense activity. Large trucks delivered sophisticated equipment, specialized teams of workers rotated in almost uninterrupted shifts, and a discreet temporary fence surrounded the property, blocking the view of curious locals who naturally became interested in the unusual movement. Rumors spread throughout the small community, ranging from speculations about a major automotive repair franchise to more extravagant theories involving secret government facilities. The project manager, an efficient man named Robert, faithfully followed specific instructions. No information about the real owner, no details about the final concept, only vague assurances that the outcome would be beneficial for the community. Behind the temporary fence, the workshop was undergoing a complete transformation. Internal walls were reconfigured to create more spacious and functional areas without sacrificing the original character of the building. State-of-the-art equipment arrived daily: modern hydraulic lifts capable of hoisting the heaviest vehicles, computerized diagnostic systems that could detect flaws invisible to the human eye, specialized tools representing the cutting edge of automotive technology. At the same time, due to explicit insistence in the project guidelines, original elements were carefully preserved and restored. The historic Thompson and Son sign was removed, cleaned of decades of exposure to the elements, repainted in its original colors, and reinstalled with subtle lighting that highlighted it without over-modernizing it. Walter's father's vintage tools, which had hung on the walls more as relics than functional instruments, were carefully cleaned and arranged in special display cases with small, explanatory plaques detailing their history and function. The old black and white photographs showing 3 generations of Thompson mechanics were carefully removed from simple wooden frames, digitally restored to remove stains and discolorations, and reframed in new frames that, although new, maintained the original, unpretentious style. "These tools should be treated like museum artifacts," instructed the restoration supervisor to the workers. "Every scratch tells a story. Every mark of use represents knowledge passed down from father to son. We don't want like-new pieces. We want to preserve the history contained in them." The most significant transformation, however, was not in the equipment or the physical structure, but in the very design of the space. Following detailed plans, the workers divided the large main area into 2 integrated sections: the workshop itself, fully functional and equipped to handle modern repairs, and an educational area with workbenches for apprentices, explanatory boards, and a small auditorium for technical demonstrations. A bronze plaque, still covered for future unveiling, was installed near the entrance, although its contents remained a mystery even to the workers of the project. In the less visible corner of the property, a small apartment was built, a modest but comfortable space, fully accessible, with a view of the newly planted garden where there had previously only been gravel and rubble. "The contractor was extremely specific about every detail," Robert remarked to the architect during an inspection. "I've never seen someone so concerned with preserving the essence of a place while completely modernizing it. Usually clients want to erase the past, not celebrate it." In the final weeks of the renovation, mysterious late-night visits began to intrigue the security team. A tall man would always arrive after midnight, when the last shift of workers had already left, in a discreet car with tinted windows. Wearing a cap and sunglasses even in the dark, he would enter with his own key and stay for about an hour before leaving quietly. The management's instructions were clear: no interaction, no questioning, no recording. Just ensure his safety from a distance, without interfering with his activities inside the property. During these solitary visits, Michael Jordan personally supervised the most significant aspects of the transformation, checking if his vision was being faithfully executed, adjusting details that others might consider insignificant, but that, to him, made all the difference in preserving the authenticity of the space. "It's like watching a dream take physical form," he remarked to Robert during one of the rare occasions when their paths crossed on the property. "We're creating something that honors the past while building a future." On one of these late-night visits, Jordan found himself alone at the heart of the nearly completed workshop. The workers had left hours earlier, and the silence was broken only by the occasional creak of the structure settling and the distant hum of electrical equipment in standby mode. Under the emergency lights casting long shadows across the freshly painted walls, he walked slowly through the space, absorbing every detail with the same focused intensity he once devoted to studying opponents on the court. His hands, which had performed athletic feats watched by millions, now respectfully passed over the old wooden counter that had been preserved and restored. The surface, though sanded and varnished, still carried its scars from decades. Small notches, oil stains that had deeply penetrated the wood, marks from tools and pens that silently told stories of transactions, diagnoses, and commitments sealed with handshakes. "How many people have leaned on this?" he murmured to himself, imagining the countless conversations that had taken place over that simple piece of wood. How many pieces of news, good and bad? How many lives were impacted by the honest work done here? Jordan stopped in front of the wall where the Thompson family photographs had been reinstalled. 3 generations of men with the same determined eyes and calloused hands, each contributing to build something that transcended a simple business. A legacy of trust, skill, and service to the community. The last photo showed Walter beside his grown son, both with grease-stained overalls, smiling in front of the workshop on a sunny day that seemed to belong to a simpler era. Jordan studied the image for several minutes, as if seeking in it the confirmation that his elaborate plan was not just a gesture of gratitude, but a way of preserving something valuable that would otherwise be lost. Not just a business, but a tradition, a form of knowledge passed down from generation to generation. A work ethic that was becoming increasingly rare in a world of disposable products and planned obsolescence. "What we created here is bigger than both of us, Walter," he said softly, as if the man in the photograph could hear him through time and distance. "And maybe that's what really matters in the end. Not the championships or records, but what we leave behind for those who will come after us." 3 months passed in the blink of an eye. Winter had come and gone, leaving behind a spring that painted Oakwood with soft shades of green and wildflowers. Walter Thompson watched through the window of his small house while Lucy played in the backyard, chasing a particularly bold squirrel that had ventured down from an oak tree. The girl's red hair danced in the wind as she ran in circles, her crystal-clear laughter filling the morning air. It was a sound Walter feared he would never hear again during the dark days when his granddaughter's fate seemed uncertain. The treatment in Boston had been an overwhelming success, beyond the most optimistic medical expectations. What had started as an experimental procedure had become a case study that Dr. Harrison had already presented at 2 international conferences. A medical miracle, as the team affectionately called Lucy's case. The recovery had been surprisingly swift. Where there had once been a pale and fragile child who would tire after climbing a few steps, now stood this vibrant and energetic creature, seemingly determined to make up for every minute of lost activity during her illness. "Lucy, don't wander too far," Walter called through the open window, watching his granddaughter come dangerously close to the fence that marked the property line. "Your mom will be here in an hour, and we need to be ready to leave." The phone rang at exactly 10 o'clock, interrupting the late breakfast Walter was preparing for Lucy. The voice on the other end of the line was formal, professional, and completely unknown. A man who identified himself only as a representative of Horizon Investments, the mysterious company that had acquired the Thompson and Son workshop. In the months since the sale, Walter had deliberately avoided passing by the old family property. The road to the market, to church, and practically anywhere in the small town of Oakwood could be altered to avoid the sight of that building, which carried so much of his identity. Rumors about the renovation circulated through the town. Some spoke of an auto repair franchise, others of an antique car museum, and the more pessimistic predicted a parking lot or convenience store. Walter refused to participate in these speculations, politely changing the subject whenever someone tried to discuss the fate of the old workshop. After all, what really mattered was that the money from the sale had ensured Lucy's successful treatment, and that result was worth any sacrifice. Mr. Thompson, we would like to invite you to a special visit to the old workshop today at 2 o'clock, said the voice on the phone, with a tone that sounded strangely ceremonial for a simple invitation. The renovation is complete, and before the official opening, we thought it would be appropriate for you to be the first to see the result. Would it be possible for you to bring your granddaughter Lucy as well? There are elements of the project we believe both of you would appreciate seeing. Walter gripped the phone tighter, feeling his heart race inexplicably. There was something in the formality of the invitation, in the specific mention of Lucy, that stirred both curiosity and apprehension. For months, he had mentally prepared himself to eventually pass by the old workshop and see another business in its place, perhaps an impersonal franchise with shiny logos and standardized uniforms. The idea of being formally invited to witness this transformation seemed strangely cruel, like being asked to identify the body of a loved one. "May I ask what the exact purpose of this visit is?" Walter inquired, his voice betraying more emotion than he intended. "The workshop no longer belongs to me, and frankly, I'm not sure I want to see what you've done with it." The morning dragged on with torturous slowness after the phone call. Walter moved around the house in a state of nervous distraction, tidying up objects that didn't need tidying, checking the clock repeatedly as if he could speed up or slow down the passage of time by sheer force of will. Lucy, sensing her grandfather's unease, had become unusually quiet, watching him with attentive eyes that seemed to understand more than her 9 years suggested. Finally, when the clock struck 1:30, Walter helped his granddaughter put on her light spring coat, a gift he had bought with part of the money from the sale of the workshop, and they both set out for the short walk to the meeting place. The day was surprisingly pleasant, with a pale blue sky dotted with high, scattered clouds that seemed still on the horizon. The trees along the main street displayed tender green shoots, and some well-tended gardens already showed the first flowers of the season. The town felt especially quiet that Thursday afternoon, as if holding its breath in anticipation. "Grandpa, why are you so nervous?" Lucy asked, gripping Walter's hand tightly as they walked. "Your hand is sweating, and you didn't even smile when I told you about the squirrel. Is it because we're going to see the old workshop? Mom said you sold it so the doctors could fix my heart." Walter's thoughts kept pace with his hesitant steps down the familiar streets of Oakwood. As they neared the block where the workshop was located, he felt a growing knot in his throat, a mix of anticipated sadness, reluctant curiosity, and a strange sense that something extraordinary was about to happen. The final turn around the corner would reveal the fate of the property that his family had cared for 70 years, and each step in that direction seemed both inevitable and impossible. Lucy walked beside him, occasionally skipping in small hops that demonstrated the restored energy the treatment had given her. A constant reminder that, no matter what they found ahead, the true miracle had already happened. "Maybe I'm nervous because it's like visiting a place you loved, but now it belongs to someone else," Walter finally answered, forcing a reassuring smile. "Like when you lent your favorite teddy bear to your friend Charlotte and worried whether she would take good care of it." When they finally turned the corner and the workshop came into view, Walter stopped abruptly, as if he had walked into an invisible wall. Lucy, still holding his hand, looked at her grandfather with concern before following his fixed gaze. Before them, the old Thompson and Son workshop had been completely transformed, and yet, inexplicably, it remained the same at its core. The facade gleamed with fresh paint that respected the original colors, windows clean and reflecting the afternoon sun, and the traditional Thompson and Son sign restored to its original splendor. But there was something new, an addition that made Walter blink repeatedly to ensure his eyes weren't deceiving him. Beneath the familiar name, new elegant and discreet letters proclaimed Mechanical Academy. A small group of people waited in front of the building, all dressed too formally for Oakwood's casual standards, apparently waiting for their arrival. Walter stood still for several seconds, absorbing the sight with an expression that shifted between shock, confusion, and the hesitant beginnings of hope. "Grandpa, it's your name," Lucy exclaimed excitedly, pointing to the sign. And it says academy. Is it like a school? Are you going to teach people how to fix cars like you taught me to fix my bike? Approaching slowly, as if afraid that any sudden movement might make the vision in front of him disappear, Walter was greeted by a man in a suit who introduced himself as Robert, the manager of the renovation project. With respectfully formal gestures, he invited Walter and Lucy to enter, explaining that there would be a small ceremony in a few minutes, but that he would first like to show them the renovated interior. The main doors opened to a space that Walter simultaneously recognized and found strange. It was his workshop, yet it was something completely new. The concrete floor, once stained by decades of oil and grease, had been treated and sealed, preserving some of the historical marks as part of the design. The walls, now painted a soft shade of bluish gray, displayed decorative tools and informational posters about automotive mechanics. But the most surprising element was the layout of the space. Half of the large area remained as a functional workshop, with modern hydraulic lifts, computerized diagnostic equipment, and impeccably organized workbenches. The other half, however, had been transformed into an educational space, with rows of smaller workbenches clearly intended for students. A small auditorium with chairs arranged in a semicircle and high-definition monitors for technical demonstrations. Everything was designed following specific instructions to honor the history of the original workshop while preparing it for its new purpose, Robert explained, watching Walter's reaction carefully. Every detail was considered to preserve the spirit and legacy of the Thompson family while incorporating cutting-edge technology for the future. Walter walked through the space in silent reverence, his fingers touching tools and surfaces as if trying to confirm the reality of what he was seeing through touch. His eyes welled up as he identified, in a lit display case, his father's original tools. The set he had used to teach Walter when he was a boy, now displayed as precious relics, accompanied by photographs and a plaque detailing their history. On another wall, an illustrated timeline showed the evolution of the Thompson workshop since its founding in 1952, with photographs of 3 generations of the family, including some Walter hadn't known still existed. Lucy ran back and forth, fascinated by the shiny machines and the old photos on the walls, excitedly pointing when she found images of her great-grandfather working in the same building decades ago. There was an almost magical energy in the environment, a tangible respect for the past combined with a vibrant enthusiasm for the future. How is this possible? Let Walter murmur to himself, trying to process what he was seeing. Who would do something like this? And why? The answer to that question came in the most unexpected way. As Walter examined the old service counter, now restored, but still bearing the scratches and marks that told its story, a side door opened. The sound made Walter turn, still absorbed in thoughts about who could be behind such an extraordinary transformation. The figure who emerged through the door was impossibly familiar and equally surreal. Michael Jordan entered the room with the same magnetic presence that had dominated basketball courts for over a decade. His 6'6" frame seemed to fill the space, not only physically, but with an aura of historical importance that few celebrities genuinely possess. Dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit, he moved through the space with the fluid grace that millions of fans would instantly recognize. Walter froze where he stood, his mind struggling to make the connection between the legendary basketball star and the small workshop in Oakwood. Lucy, less affected by the shock, opened her mouth in a small O of recognition. Even for a child of her generation, Michael Jordan was an instantly identifiable icon. You ... Walter stammered when he finally regained the ability to speak, suddenly remembering the driver he had helped on the road months earlier. Now, in the clear light of the renovated workshop, without the rain and darkness obscuring his vision, the identity of that young man was unmistakable. That day on the road, it was you. Jordan smiled, that familiar smile known to millions of fans worldwide, but now carrying a deeply personal meaning for the old mechanic. There was a warm quality to his expression that cameras rarely captured, something genuine and almost vulnerable that contrasted with his public image of a relentless competitor. Approaching with deliberately slow steps, as if understanding Walter's need to process that extraordinary moment, Jordan extended his hand in a gesture that, in its simplicity, seemed to connect two completely different worlds. "You didn't recognize me that day, and that made your kindness even more special," Jordan said, his voice softer and more reflective than the confident tone he used in interviews. "You didn't help me because of who I am, but simply because someone needed help. At that moment, I wasn't Michael Jordan to you. I was just a driver in trouble on a country road during a storm." Walter automatically accepted the handshake, his mind still struggling to connect the dots between the anonymous driver in the storm, the mysterious purchase of the workshop, the inexplicable medical program that saved Lucy, and now the presence of Michael Jordan himself explaining everything as if it were the final chapter of a meticulously planned story. Lucy timidly approached, her wide eyes alternating between her grandfather's face and the legendary athlete's, intuitively sensing the significance of the moment even without fully understanding its implications. "I don't understand," Walter finally managed to say, a whirlwind of emotions showing through his voice. "You, you're behind all of this? The purchase? The renovation? Lucy's treatment in Boston?" The next few minutes unfolded like a lucid dream for Walter. With surprising humility for someone of his stature, Jordan explained everything. How he had been deeply moved by Walter's selfless generosity on that road. How his curiosity led him to discreetly visit the workshop days later. How, by coincidence or fate, he had witnessed the conversation about the forced sale and Lucy's condition. He explained the shell company created specifically for the anonymous purchase, the contacts with Dr. Harrison to ensure priority treatment, and the vision for the workshop transformed into a hands-on mechanic academy, a place where the knowledge accumulated over generations wouldn't be lost, but passed on to young apprentices. As the explanation unfolded, Walter's face showed a progression of emotions, from initial disbelief to understanding, and finally a gratitude so deep that words seemed entirely inadequate to express it. Lucy, absorbing the narrative with the extraordinary receptiveness of children, squeezed her grandfather's hand with increasing strength, as if sensing they were at the epicenter of something truly extraordinary. "But why?" Walter asked when Jordan paused. "You barely know me. It was just a simple fix on the road. Any decent mechanic would have done the same." Jordan slowly shook his head, a thoughtful smile on his lips. "That day, you reminded me of something I sometimes forget in the midst of advertising contracts, investments, and branding strategies. You reminded me that a person's true worth isn't in what they own or the fame they've earned, but in the small moments of genuine kindness when no one is watching. To many, I am Michael Jordan, the basketball legend, the businessman, the face on the posters. To you that day, I was just someone in need of help, and that was liberating." Walter listened, stunned, gripping his granddaughter's hand tightly, as if to make sure he wasn't dreaming. The puzzle pieces were finally falling into place. The generous offer for the workshop, the miraculous selection for the experimental program, the renovation that so respectfully preserved the family legacy. It wasn't a coincidence, but a meticulously orchestrated plan by someone with virtually unlimited resources and seemingly a profound sense of gratitude that transcended the initial gesture that had inspired him. "But you've paid your debt several times over," protested Walter, gesturing toward the renovated workshop. "All of this, it's much more than a simple thank you for fixing a car." With a deliberate movement, Jordan reached for a leather folder on the restored counter, an item Walter hadn't noticed before, so absorbed was he in the transformation of the space. Carefully opening it, Jordan pulled out a set of legal documents and extended them to Walter. The high-quality paper bore the official logo of the Thompson and Son Mechanics Academy, followed by meticulously formatted legal text. "This workshop is no longer yours to sell, Walter. It's yours to teach. To continue your family's legacy," Jordan said, handing him the leather folder with the documents. "Here are the official papers. The workshop is in your name again, with an endowment fund for maintenance and salaries for you and the young apprentices who will come. There's also a fully adapted apartment at the back for you and Lucy, if you'd like to live closer to the work." Walter flipped through the documents with trembling hands, his eyes catching phrases like transfer of ownership, perpetual maintenance fund, and nonprofit educational program. It was more than the return of a workshop. It was the creation of an institution, a formalized legacy that would survive far beyond his own life. The implications were overwhelming. His mind tried to calculate the cost of such an undertaking, not just the original purchase and physical renovation, but the perpetual fund mentioned in the documents, which would ensure the continuation of operations for decades. It was the kind of gesture that transcended mere generosity. It was a form of immortality for the knowledge and values his family represented. "I don't know what to say," Walter began, his voice choked with emotion, the words seeming trivial in light of the magnitude of the moment. "How can I thank you for something like this? This goes way beyond." Jordan interrupted him with a gentle but firm gesture. There was an intensity in his eyes that reminded Walter of the decisive moments in great games. Not the competitive ferocity fans knew, but the absolute clarity of purpose that had always characterized his approach to life. "You taught me something important on that road, Walter, something that no coach, teammate, or business mentor has ever fully been able to teach me," Jordan said, his voice taking on a reflective quality. "Sometimes a small act of kindness can change everything, not just for the one who receives it, but also for the one who offers it." This workshop will now also house a fund for children with heart diseases, the Walter Thompson Foundation, which will run in parallel with the Academy. Every car repaired here will indirectly contribute to other children receiving the treatment that saved Lucy. Lucy, who had been surprisingly silent throughout the exchange, suddenly stepped forward, looking directly at Jordan with the straightforwardness that only children possess. Without ceremony or shyness, she asked the question that Walter might have been too polite to phrase. "You did all this because my grandpa fixed your car?" "Just because of that." Jordan bent down to meet the girl's eye level, a gesture that diminished his impressive stature and created a direct, equal connection with the child. His face displayed an expression of absolute sincerity, as if the question deserved the most honest answer possible. "It wasn't just the car repair, Lucy," he answered softly. "It was the way he did it, without expecting anything in return, without recognition, without even knowing who I was. In my life, I'm used to people doing things for me because I'm Michael Jordan. Your grandfather did something for me because I was simply someone needing help. And that made me remember that beneath all the layers of fame and fortune, that's what really matters. The moments when we choose to help each other simply because we can." The official opening ceremony that followed was small and intimate, just as Jordan had planned. A few selected members of the community were invited: the local school principal, representatives from the Oakwood Chamber of Commerce, potential partners for the educational program. The mayor of the small town attended, visibly impressed by both Jordan's presence and the magnitude of the project being implemented in his jurisdiction. Speeches were made, symbolic ribbons were cut, and champagne was served in discreet glasses while the guests explored the renovated facilities. Walter, still processing the monumental transformation in his life, found himself at the center of attention, a role he was not used to, but took on with the simple dignity that had always characterized him. "I now understand that our workshop was never just a business," Walter said during his brief improvised speech. "It was a repository of knowledge, a form of service to the community. And now, thanks to extraordinary vision and generosity, it will be a learning center for future generations." The true conclusion of the journey, however, took place long after the official opening. On a spring morning very similar to the one of the reveal, the Thompson and Son Workshop School was buzzing with activity. 12 young apprentices, men and women aged between 16 and 25, occupied the workbenches under Walter's watchful supervision. Their young hands handled tools with growing confidence as they learned not only the technical skills of auto repair, but also the philosophy that had always guided the Thompson family's work: to repair rather than replace, to value durability over convenience, and to treat each vehicle as an extension of its owner's life. The sound of tools and laughter filled the air, creating a symphony of productivity and camaraderie that made Walter's heart swell with pride. In a special corner of the workshop, a space had been adapted for younger children, clients' kids, and more significantly, children recovering from heart procedures funded by the Walter Thompson Foundation. Among them stood Lucy herself, fully recovered, serving as an inspiring example and informal mentor to the little ones. Her simplified explanations of how engines worked captivated both boys and girls, possibly planting seeds for future careers in engineering or mechanics. "You have to listen to the engine," Lucy explained to a boy of about 7, repeating the words she had often heard from her grandfather. "Every little sound tells a story. It's like when you're not feeling well. Your body gives signals. Cars do the same." At the entrance of the workshop school, partially hidden by the doorframe, a small bronze plaque discreetly installed captured the essence of the entire project in a few words. "Inspired by a roadside repair." For most visitors, it was just an enigmatic phrase, possibly a generic motivational slogan. For the few who knew the true story, however, it was a powerful testament to the impact that small acts of kindness can have when they find fertile ground. Walter occasionally stopped in front of the plaque, briefly touching it in a nearly reverential gesture, recalling the extraordinary chain of events that had transformed a simple act of help into a legacy that now directly touched dozens of lives and potentially hundreds indirectly over the years. "Who would have imagined that fixing a car in the rain would lead to all this?" he murmured to himself in moments of quiet reflection. "Maybe we'll never truly know the impact of our small kindnesses." On that particular afternoon, a black Range Rover discreetly parked across the street. Its sole occupant did not exit the vehicle, preferring to watch the scene through the windshield. Walter patiently instructing a group of young people on the almost forgotten art of rebuilding rather than replacing. Lucy playing with other children among tools and spare parts carefully stored in colorful boxes. The community gathered around a center of knowledge and healing that pulsed with life and purpose. Michael Jordan watched silently, his face lit by a smile rarely captured by cameras. Not the calculated smile from advertising campaigns or the triumphant smile of championships won, but a genuine smile of quiet satisfaction. In his career, he had won championships, broken records, and earned millions. But few moments had brought him the true satisfaction he felt now, witnessing the blossoming of something created not to increase his own glory, but to perpetuate the spirit of a casual encounter that reminded him of what really matters. "Some legacies are not measured in points or titles," he reflected, watching Walter demonstrate a complex procedure with the same patience and precision he had shown on that rainy road. "They're measured in lives touched, knowledge passed on, and kindness multiplied." Walter's legacy would continue, as would the lives touched by that small workshop on a road outside of Chicago, a testament to the transformative power of a selfless act of kindness and to the human capacity to recognize true value even in the most unlikely circumstances. And perhaps in future decades, when stories of Michael Jordan's athletic feats were told and retold until they became almost mythical, this quiet chapter of his life would remain known only to a few. A reminder that sometimes our most meaningful actions are those that never make the headlines. Did you enjoy the story of Michael Jordan and Walter Thompson? Then subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and don't miss the next video that's already waiting for you on the screen. I'll see you there. Oh, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what you thought of the ending of this story.